So our next story takes us to the Red Sea and that ragtag group of little tiny freedom fighters known as the Houthi and their attack against defenseless commercial vessels on the high sea. Yes, I do have a problem with the Houthis attacking commercial vessels on the high sea. And the Houthi have upped their attacks. However, I want to put this into context because we just witnessed a strike by the Israelis against Western Yemen. They attacked military targets, including fuel storage facilities. The attacks have been increasing. We just saw a new range of attacks. This story out in G-Captain, 2 attacks northwest of Yemen's Mokha reported. These are the latest attacks that we've seen on vessels. We saw the attack on the Chios Lion, a very dramatic attack with an uncrewed surface vessel. Attacks against Bentley One, other attacks against merchant vessels, attack against Mare Sentosa, just a uptick in the number of attacks that are taking place. And does this represent a uptick in the number of Houthi attacks? In other words, are the Houthi just increasing their level of attacks? I actually think it's not that. I think it's because the U.S. military, along with the United Kingdom and even the European Union and other navies, are pulling back and changing their method of their defense. I posted this over on Twitter, and I'll have a link to this, which is an unroll of that thread so that you can take a look at it. It's my discussion, what I call a tale of two carriers. And what's happening right now is the USS Eisenhower battle group has just returned home to great fanfare. The USS Teddy Roosevelt has arrived in the theater, and there's supposed to be a swap out between the two. Now, the Eisenhower group has gotten a lot of accolades. The ships, the crews, the Secretary of the Navy went on board, many of the naval vessels, but behind the scenes, a USNS, U.S. naval ship with civilian crew on arrived at home with very little fanfare. The crews on the U.S. Navy ships were awarded combat action ribbons. The civilian crews got nothing. And let me be clear, I know that combat action ribbons only go to those in the military. However, if the Navy wants to keep playing like crews on military Sea Lift Command vessels are not in the Navy, then you are not kidding anybody. 1 out of 5 vessels in the U.S. Navy have civilian crews on board. You are treating them as second-class citizens. When you give combat action ribbons and awards to military personnel for doing the same exact thing as the civilian crews do, you're treating them like crap. You are. And if you don't give them a combat action ribbon, you should at least have the maritime administrator down there to give them merchant marine expeditionary medals. So we know of this going on, but one of the things that we talk about here is that with the Houthi seizure of vessels, starting with Galaxy Leader, which they're still holding, we saw the initiation of Operation Prosperity Guardian, the plus up of CTF 153, and the decision to kind of begin this operation. Now, this was a big change in pace because it represented a change by the president and the Department of Defense to defend not just U.S. flag vessels, but all vessels. This is a marked difference than what had happened during the Iran-Iraq War and the Tanker War and Somali piracy. And if you've never seen the episode of South Park of Somali piracy, you really must. It is a classic. Operation take place, Prosperity Guardian, the shooting down of missiles. The Eisenhower battle group shifted from the Persian Gulf over to the Arabian Sea and then down into the Gulf of Aden and eventually into the Red Sea. U.S. Aegis-class destroyers along with Royal Navy destroyers took up guard positions between the main shipping channels in Yemen and started to shoot down drones, missiles, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, unmanned surface craft, you name it. They just went to town. But the problem was that there seemed to be no comprehension that was driving the commercial ships away wasn't just the Houthi attacks, but it was the rise in war risk insurance. When war risk insurance went from 0.02% up to 0.75 to 1%, that meant all ships under $100 million in value, that is ship and cargo, were going to divert around Africa because it is just economical to do that. And when Maersk and Hapag decided to do that on December 15th, they were on the precipice of forming a new alliance, the Gemini Alliance. They did so without really coordinating it. And what we saw was this mass wave. These images come from the IMF Port Watch, and you can see how the Suez Canal transits just dropped, Bab el-Mandeb transits dropped, and Cape of Good Hope transits just kind of peaked up. But what was even more concerning is that while the U.S. Navy went to town shooting down drones and missiles and guarding vessels, they didn't seem to be doing it for U.S. flag vessels. There were attacks against U.S. flag vessels that went very badly. They evening of January 9th, there was a big attack on 4 U.S. flag vessels. There were problems in communications. Although no U.S. vessels were hit, it was a bit of a cluster. And then on January 24th, you had 2 U.S. flag vessels, the Maersk Detroit, Maersk Chesapeake, try to run through the area, and they were turned around. For the first time, U.S. vessels were turned around. In other words, U.S. vessels can't sail where they want to go. And this is a key element. Freedom of the seas is a key thing. We went to war over this multiple times. World War I, the reason we go into World War I, read Wilson's speech in April of 1917. It is freedom of the seas. It's friggin' point number 1 of the 14 points he makes. Not a big fan of Wilson all the time for what he does, but that was one of the key things that we did. We defended shipping before our arrival into World War II. We were convoying ships across. This is the loss of Reuben James on Halloween of 1941. Robin Moore, a U.S. freighter heading up to Africa with cargo. This is key. We do this all the time, yet for some reason we decided not to do it. And instead what we see is operations like the European Union's Operation Aspides, which is using their ships, the ships of the Marine Nationale and the Italian Navy, to guard their own vessels. They're providing close-in escort so that lines like Grimaldi and CMA CGM can still run vessels through the area, whereas the U.S. is not doing that. And this goes back to this larger issue then. What is going on with the arrival of the Teddy Roosevelt? The Eisenhower group left, but it doesn't appear that it has been replaced. We got word that the Teddy Roosevelt arrived in the AOR. Konstantin Toropin over at military.com did me a great favor. He asked a Navy official about it, and he said that the TR and its 4 escorting destroyers, there's no cruiser with it, which is kind of strange, arrived in the Arabian Sea, but we don't know that the Cole, the Russell, the McCain, or the Inouye are anywhere near the coast of Yemen right now, which indicates to me that the U.S. Navy is backing off Operation Prosperity Guardian. And if they are backing off Operation Prosperity Guardian, leaving it to the European Union, who has come out, by the way, and said they don't have enough assets to do this, then that means ships are more exposed to attack. But the question is, okay, who's sending their vessels in? This great tweet over by Ed Finley over on Twitter was kind of chastising Harry Vassis, Greek ship owner, for sending in his vessels into the area. He had sent in Transworld Navigator, which was hit. He sent in Chios Lion. And again, the question is, Greek ship owners, or any ship owner, is going to send their ships into the area if it's economical, if it's cheaper. I know that ship owners will sit there and say, oh, you know, we're out here for the safety of the crews. Okay, it's good. I'm glad you're saying that. But your overriding issue is money. Let's be clear about that. It is money. If it is cheaper to go through the Red Sea, you will go through the Red Sea, guaranteed. You will do it in a second, guaranteed. They diverted because of the money issue, and that was the big concern that happened. Now, this has exposed shipping for more attacks, and the Houthi have launched their attacks. Now, the Houthi will attack, I think, any ship. They use their 4 degrees of separation to Kevin Bacon to do it. I keep getting told we're in the 4th level of Houthi operations, meaning that any company that has a ship that touches Israel or connected to the US or UK is fair game. Okay, I mean, that again, it's the 4 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon. That's what you're doing now. You're just trying to connect the dots. And what is actually happening is you're causing more of an ecological, environmental damage to the region than what you're inflicting on the world. The hit on the Chios Lion, which was a tanker, which again, I'd be happy to show you the video, but YouTube would demonetize me, is leaving a massive oil slick off the region. This is also after the United Nations, the United States, and a whole batch of nations pooled resources together to drain the FSO Safer, a vessel that was decaying off the coast of Yemen, loaded with over 1 million barrels of fuel to prevent an environmental damage just prior to this. So the world came to the aid of Yemen, and now Yemen is attacking commercial shipping off its coast. And this oil slick is going to be a big problem. But it does appear that the Department of Defense, the Navy, the Fifth Fleet, the combined maritime forces have altered their tactics. They're no longer providing that blanket protection for all ships in the area, which raises the question then, what is the Teddy Roosevelt group going to do? Are they participating in strikes? We know Israel just struck Yemen. Maybe they're keeping their distance because that's happening. But we're not seeing the movement of the destroyers into the region. And matter of fact, if you look at U.S. shipping, it is intentionally avoiding the area. We are sending our ships all the way around Africa. U.S. flag ships are avoiding this. And to me, that sends a terrible message to not just the Houthis, but to anyone that will pull back. Remember, the people who are backing the Houthis is Iran. And now Iran finds it in control of two maritime choke points, Straits of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb. Cheers. I don't have anything to drink. I didn't bring a drink with me today. So they're controlling two of the key maritime choke points. Who does that raise concern with? Well, the world for shipping, but more importantly, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's got to be worried about this because they're bottlenecked on two ends. Egypt is losing massive amounts of money. Just a report came out that Egypt has lost $2 billion in tolls. Here's a story over in Maritime Executive about that loss. In FY 23-24, the Suez Canal Authority revenue fell to $7.2 billion from $9.4 billion the prior year, a drop of about 23%. The total tonnage passing through the canal fell by a third, and the number of transits declined by about 22% year over year, as the Houthi attacks only began in earnest in November of 2023 after half of the fiscal year had passed. The numbers partially reflect business as usual performance last summer and fall. It's going to have a much larger impact here in the next upcoming fiscal year. So with Egypt having a major hand here now, with Iran having a major hand here in the Straits of Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, and even over in the Suez Canal region, Egypt finds itself in a very difficult position. It can't really go and smack the Houthis. It's one of the few countries that recognize the Houthis. Plus, it's got Gaza and Hamas on its border, so it really can't go in, which then makes the issue about whether or not the U.S. government understands how this confrontation is going. What is needed is not just a military approach, but a political and economic approach. I've been just reading Nick Lambert's newest book, The Neptune Factor, Alfred Thayer Mahan, and the concept of sea power. And he makes the point that the military misunderstand Mahan. Mahan has always been viewed as decisive battle. We're going to use military might to effect change. Go in for the decisive battle and you win. What they fail to realize is that the key issue here is economics. And when you go down and you kind of peel it off, you start understanding that. So what's going to bring shipping back to the region is not a defeat of the Houthis, but a reduction in the war risk insurance. And so while we're winning the tactical level here, shooting down a ton of missiles and drones, we're losing the operational and the strategic level. And to me, that is the big concern. And when you look at what's happening with shipping, and these graphs from Alpha Line kind of indicate that we're seeing container ships, for example, not being demolished. So we're seeing a reduction in the number of container ships going off because you need them for those longer hauls around Africa. Ton miles, you can see that almost all the ultra large container vessels are going around Africa, not through the Suez Canal. That's what that blue indicates. We're seeing that companies are buying more container ships so that they can have additional container ships. And if you look at where they're being deployed, the vast majority of container ships are on that Asia to Europe run. And again, that's consuming a lot of tonnage at this time. And so while it's a tale of two carriers, it's a tale of two container ships too. The container ships are saying, oh, woe is me, we can't go through the Red Sea. At the same time, they're making record profits. And to them, that's really the most important thing. And so it comes back to this issue then. You need the following done. You need efforts to de-escalate the conflict in Gaza and undercut the Houthi narrative. There just needs to be that perception that the world is doing everything it can to undercut the Houthis. Now, let me be clear. I don't think even if the situation in Gaza ends tomorrow, the Houthis stop. They have a new feeling of power among the world. I don't think they just kind of back down. We need a new naval strategy beyond whack-a-drone, missile, and USV. We need to cut supplies heading to Yemen from Iran. There was just a latest report in, I think it was Financial Times, talking about Russia may be starting to supply arms to the Houthi. That has to be curtailed. And more importantly, we have to coordinate with shipping firms and insurance clubs. What can we do to resume voyages? The way we financed war risk in the world wars should be looked at. We provided part of the war risk. Now, we're not going to provide funding for ships registered in Liberia, the Marshall Islands, Panama, Isle of Man, Cyprus, Malta. But if you want to come over to the U.S. registry, we will help undercut your war risk. The U.S. government should help underwrite part of that. Not pay for it, but underwrite it, pay part of that payment or give tax incentives to help defer those costs. That will get U.S. vessels going through. If you eliminate the additional costs, the ships will go through. If you build it, they will come. I guarantee you that. And that's one of the things that we're missing. And then finally, the deployment of the TR may be a repeat of the Eisenhower, or it could be a watered down version and therefore expose more shipping to Houthi attacks, which helped their propaganda campaign. Either way, world trade needs some intervention, or this will become the norm. And to me, there's no better Norm than Norm from Cheers. That is my take on what's happening in the Red Sea. Now, this situation is developing. The Israeli attacks on Yemen, on the Houthi right now, have the potential to boil up. No telling how the Houthi take that. They are shocked, I tell you, that the Israelis would attack civilian targets. I mean, obviously, the Houthi have no problem attacking civilian targets because they've killed 4 merchant mariners on ships, even though I'm told it was an accident. Shooting missiles and unmanned surface vessels at vessels obviously will accidentally kill people. No, it intentionally kills people. When you send explosives heading toward ships, you're going to kill someone, and they have. So the situation in the Red Sea is definitely a new one and transpiring, and we're going to keep watching it. All right, if you enjoyed today's episode, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Hit that super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber.